Welcome back to the Untriggered Parenting Podcast with me, Paula Sampson Lawrence. Today, my very special guest is Michelle Steiner. Michelle is a paraeducator and a disability writer. On this episode, she speaks with me about what it's like to live with an invisible disability and how she advocates for the students in her care. Let's dive in. So, Michelle, welcome to the show. And please do introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about yourself.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Paula. My name is Michelle Steiner. I live in Pennsylvania with my husband, Ron, and our two cats, Jack and Sparrow. And I work...
Love that.
Oh, thank you. And I work as a paraeducator in a school with students that have disabilities and some who don't. And I'm also a disability writer, speaker, and photographer. And I have a learning disability myself.
And is that what kind of spurred you into going into what you do now because of your own disability?
Yes, definitely. It has been wonderful to be able to go there and to be able to help other people that have disabilities. And it's so rewarding to be able to give back. If I'm in the classroom, a lot of times it's like, somebody helped me with that when I was that age.
Yeah.
And yeah, and sometimes with the writing, a lot of times people will say, oh, that's my story too, or I struggle with that. So I just think it's so rewarding to be able to give back.
And are you sort of happy to share what your disability is and how you manage that on your day-to-day personal and professional life?
Sure. I have dyscalculia, which is a math learning disability. And I also have limited hand dexterity in both of my hands, and I have visual perception issues. The dyscalculia is difficulty with numbers, and I just don't get how numbers work. And it's also really hard for me to do things like read the face of a clock, understand directional concepts, and I'll mess up my left or my right. So that can be really difficult. I also, with my limited hand dexterity, they didn't find out until I was an adult.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so things such as opening up locks and doors, and sometimes things will just fall into my hands. And when I was younger, I never had really good handwriting, and everybody just thought, okay, it's a learning disability. And it's kind of interesting. Yes, it's definitely still part of a learning disability, but it's also with hand dexterity as well. It can be really tough for me. And I also have visual perception issues, but those issues are in my brain, not in my eyes. So I have typical vision and I cannot drive, and it can be really hard with my reaction time. And just eye-hand coordination is difficult for me as well.
Oh, so with the students that you work with, what age group does that sort of cover?
I am with middle school students. This year we have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And this year I am working with 6th graders.
And how do you support them on a day-to-day through their school life?
I get the chance to go in their class with them, and I can help them if they're struggling to understand what the teacher is speaking. I get that chance to retest to them. I have that chance to encourage them to advocate and to be able to speak up for themselves. And I just think those skills are so important for them. Now, they all know, do not ask me for help with math, and I'm not shy to tell them I cannot help you with that.
Yeah. So what are the things that you do to help them speak up for themselves? What do you think holds them back? Is it more of the case of not even knowing what they need, or being actually afraid to speak up and ask for what they need?
A lot of times they're afraid to speak up and ask for what they need. They don't want to draw attention to themselves, or they don't want to appear like they're the one that doesn't know the information.
Yeah.
And just sometimes they're afraid of their reactions. And I think it's really important, though, that they know to speak up and use their voice if they need help with something. And I've had students who've been afraid to do that, and I'll show them, okay, well, I'll go with you, let's go ask. And I go through those steps with them, and generally they're not afraid to ask for help after that point.
Oh, well, that's excellent. And do you work, is it in a group setting, or is it just like one-to-one sort of students in the classroom?
I mainly work in a group setting.
Okay.
I do have a one-to-one at the very end of the day for somebody, and I did one-on work in the past as well.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit, because it might be different here in the UK, but in the US, what is the school system like in terms of support for students with disabilities?
Our students that have disabilities receive an individual education plan where we
Hmm.
have supports in place that has their diagnosis after they've been tested and things that their accommodations they're going to need. And it looks different for every student. I know when I
Hmm.
was in school, I had specialty instruction, I had extended test time, I also had the test read aloud to me. Another thing that helped was putting me in the front
Mm.
whenever for lectures. And those were things that were uh, prescribed in the IEP. And we also have a Section 504 plan that if we have a student that doesn't have a disability but still needs to have a plan,
Hmm.
that they're able to get those services as well, but they don't have goals that they're trying to do. They
To
have a
me,
plan that's in place for
yeah.
that.
And what are some of the accommodations that you have found most effective for the students that you work with that the school has really put into place and made such a difference?
I think sometimes a lot of it's having the test read aloud because sometimes
Hmm.
our students need that extra time to process information or hearing the voice and having extended test time. I think that those just really help a student that needs that just that little extra reinforcement. I think that's one of the things that we can do. And I also like that in our school system, we try to work as a team. If something's not working, we go and do the next thing. And I think that's really important when you have students that have disabilities. When one thing doesn't work, we have to try to
Hmm.
figure out something else that's going to help them.
Yeah. And how is the so I guess there's a good link, or you try to maintain a good link between the school and the student and the parents. Does that
Mhm.
all work quite effectively in terms of your role, or do you feel like there's some parts that need a little bit more sort of maybe better communication or managing?
Right. I know in my role right now, I don't get a whole lot of communication with parents, but
Mm.
anytime that I do come in contact, it's been a positive experience. I do get the staff does know that I have a disability, and that's generally a positive experience with that, with being accommodated and just them knowing that.
Yeah.
And I think with the students, I think that's definitely I really enjoy working with my group this year, especially.
Oh, that's excellent. And how is the school with you? Do they accommodate you and the things that you need as well?
Generally, we're pretty good about
Yeah.
knowing that. I mean, yeah, we know not to, or at least the administration knows that I can't do the math.
Yeah.
And even if they had to put me in a science class or something with that, uh, the principal knows, okay, you can help keep them on task, but we understand that not everybody comes in
Yeah.
with the same skill set. And some people are good at that, and other people struggle. And some people also will struggle in the English and the reading classes.
Yeah.
And I think just sometimes we have to know that our staff, what really works is if everybody can work as a team. And that
Yeah.
was a really nice thing that if someone's not good at math, then okay, you help out with the English, and then the person that
Hmm.
can't really do that, then they're the ones that can reinforce with doing other things with math and science.
Yeah. And do you think there is any sort of particular, maybe age group or boys or girls that are more receptive to speaking up for themselves and really, being their own advocate or leaning into your supports for them to advocate for themselves?
It really depends on the child.
Child.
A lot of times, if they came from a family where the parents explain the
Mm,
disability and they have a loving, stable family, a lot of times that they're more adapt to speak up for themselves in a
yeah.
positive way, and they know they have that support. And it's also, but I've also seen some families where there might have been some family dynamics that have been shifted, where maybe not all their needs got met immediately. So they were the
Yeah.
ones that could speak up a lot easier too for what they
Yeah.
would need as well.
And is there a sort of success story or a personal thing that's happened that you always kind of remember and go, that really worked out really well, or that felt really good to help that, that student? Is there something like that you could maybe tell us about?
Definitely. I can remember that I had a student that I was helping her with her backpack at the beginning of the year. We were trying to organize things, and she just couldn't get it. She was the sweetest girl, but she just couldn't get
Mm.
that. And we went through, okay, this is your science folder, this is your social studies folder, this is English, and we were marking them. And every week we'd go through the backpack. And by the end of the school year, she goes, "How do you spell extra?" Because she wanted to have a folder for her extra papers and she knew how to
Oh,
organize her backpack. So I
oh
think that was one of
wow.
my favorite stories where I got to see that.
I love that. That's such a lovely story. And is there any challenges for you navigating your own disabilities with your professional life, or do you sort of manage it pretty okay now?
Manage it. It can still
Yeah.
get a little dicey at times. I can remember there was a class where I was trying to help a student and I couldn't do it. And I thought to myself, why am I here? And then all of a sudden someone said, this child's crying. And I went over to that person and I had that chance to have that really poignant moment with them and say, I know what it's like that I
Mm.
have a disability and it can be really hard with math, and we're going to get you the support that you need. That was a really beautiful moment with that. And I've also had funny stories too. I can remember I was trying to help out in a first grade math class and I couldn't get it. And I had a little girl that said, "Oh, why can't you do this?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just not that good with math." And she looked at me and goes, "There's grown-up school for that."
Oh, bless her. And you're
And
like,
I
thank you
just had
very
to,
much.
yeah. And I think what sometimes that does is that is humbling. And I think it gives those students that struggle a
Yeah.
chance to realize that adults struggle with things too. We don't have all the answers, and
Yeah.
there's things just sometimes we can't do, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what your disability would be called an invisible
Yes.
disability, right? So it's not anything that you can see just by looking at you. And I can
Right.
imagine that must be so hard to navigate because you're struggling maybe with something, but people can't see it. And so is there a need to explain, or how does that work? Because I can imagine that might be really frustrating because people don't see it, don't understand it, and therefore, because they can't see it, they don't believe it, maybe.
Right. I've had people that when I tell them I have a disability, they look
Mm-hmm.
at me and say, "Well, you don't look like you're disabled."
Mm.
And I have to go and try to explain to them not everybody can see a disability. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're just like in shock. They're thinking, "Oh, well, where's the cane at? Where's the walker or any other kind of device?"
Yeah.
And I don't have that. And that's okay. Not everyone
Mm-hmm.
has to be able to understand. And then people who do know me will say, "Well, you must be cured because you have a bachelor's degree or you have maintained
Um,
employment." And it's just trying to sometimes that puts a lot of pressure on me that I should be cured or overcome. And I've had
mhm.
success, but that means I found a way to be able to achieve that. But it doesn't mean that the disability went away. It just means I was able to find a way to be successful with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the sort of the school system, the education
Mhm.
system, are there any ways you think that it can be improved in terms of their support for, students with disabilities, and even and also teachers and educators like yourself?
First thing that really should happen is I think they need to have specific learning support classes for students who really do need
Mm.
them, because a lot of times we'll have a student that might have a disability in math or in reading, and they put them in a basic reading or a basic math class after a while. And a lot of them, they can't read or they
Mm-hmm.
can't do math. And sometimes you'll see the behavior problems come out. I've gotten pretty good at identifying the ones who can't read. Sometimes we will have a kid that'll be really bad and we'll go up to
Mm-hmm.
them. And it turns out that kid's not trying to make you have a hard day. he just doesn't know how to read, and he's
Mm-hmm.
trying to be the class clown rather than admitting it. And I can remember some of them, I would just say, oh, do you want me to read that for you? And
Mm-hmm.
we got our work done.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine how hard that would be for me. I never got out of learning support math. Well, we did once, and the basic teacher didn't know what to do with me in math class. So I think that being included in regular ed classes when appropriate is really important for a student. But
Yeah.
I think that there's just certain areas that I think that it would be better if that was dealt with in a smaller group setting on
Mm-hmm.
their own level. And I also think people need more disability representation in schools, because a lot of times other kids don't know of adults that have had learning disabilities that have gone to
Mm.
college or have jobs or gone to trade school. A lot of them don't have that influence, and they don't view themselves as smart, or they don't think that they have that chance to be successful in
Yeah.
whatever it is in life. So I think it's really important that they also have some representation.
Yeah, that I agree with you. That's really important. And do your students at all, do they get a say? For example, you mentioned about certain
Mhm.
classes that they should be put in.
Right.
Do they get a say to say what could help them? And do they even know sometimes? Are they able to have that language to say, this is what I need?
Sometimes our students don't have that at that age.
Yeah,
We do try to include them as they get older, especially
yeah,
when they want to leave school. We give them a say on what they want to do. And I think that's
yeah.
so important, because I can remember I knew I wanted to go to college, but I had a learning support teacher who didn't think I could do college. And I I could, and I was really lucky that I had parents
Yeah,
that advocated for me and
yeah.
believed in me and didn't sugarcoat it that it was going to always be easy,
Hmm.
but they really did a lot with that. And I just think that that's really important, that we give our students a voice and being saying what they feel, or just saying what they want in their education, and ultimately what they're
Yeah,
going to do with the rest of
yeah.
their lives.
Absolutely, absolutely agree with that. I want to just focus back on you a little bit again, and because I'm all about self-care and ways to make ourselves feel refreshed and renewed and kind of
Mhm.
focus on ourselves, especially when you work with students. And so, what do you do to kind of care for yourself and nourish your soul, I suppose?
I definitely love to work out. That's one of my biggest
Hmm.
things. I love to go to the gym
Yeah.
and do that. And sometimes I have a clearer head after I do a workout. I also love
And
to
you
read.
love going. Oh, I wish
I
I
like
loved
to
going.
go. Yeah.
I
I
have to
mean,
drag
sometimes I
myself
like,
kicking and screaming.
yeah, but I mean, yeah, I also have my audiobooks, and that's how I also get to
Yeah.
combine my love of reading when I'm on the elliptical or the treadmill. That's another way that I love to do that, because I love to read and I
Yeah.
like to write and I like to take pictures. And being that I'm not able to drive,
Hmm.
sometimes I'll be in the car with my husband and I'll say, "Did you see that?" And he'll say, "No, I'm focused on the
Yep.
road." And I oftentimes get a chance to go back and take a picture of a flower,
Yeah.
and that's just, and people say that brings out details that they would have missed. So that always
Yeah.
makes me, yeah, it's another way of something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah. And what are some of the things you mentioned driving? What other things do you have to sort of step back from because of the challenges that you experience?
Anything math related, that's been
Yeah.
a big factor. That just figuring out what I want to do for school, and also like with career choices.
Yeah.
I'm also unable to tell the time on the face of an analog clock. So I have a
Hmm.
Fitbit, and or else another digital watch or clock is also helpful. It can also really be hard for me to open up cans. I cannot use a
Hmm.
manual can opener, so I have an electric one.
Electric quad. Hmm.
Yep. And if I'm at the store, it's hard for me to total how much I'm spending. And it's always a surprise to me when I get to the register. Like I'm sure it is for everybody, but for me, it's like, oh, really? And I'll sometimes I'll use cash if we're out and I want to just because I can picture that. It's such a concrete example. I can picture the dollars and the quarters. But if you give me a credit card or a debit card, it's more of an abstract concept. Leaving a tip can be really hard. Remembering phone numbers. I mean, thankfully now we have cell phones where everything is there. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's quite a few things. And do you feel like it's all sort of second nature now, or do you sort of have to go, oh, can't do that kind of, or is it just sort of, just part of life now, isn't it?
Oh, it's a part of life. I was diagnosed when I was in kindergarten. So having a learning disability is just a part of my life. And it's just something that I have to spend the rest of my life just figuring out what works and just finding solutions and ways around things.
Yeah. So I would love to know what you would say to, or give advice to maybe somebody else who's living with an invisible disability and maybe wants to support other young people or go into it professionally. What sort of advice would you give them for that?
What I would tell people is to definitely advocate for themselves when they have a hidden disability. I mean, I know that there's a stigma that surrounds disability accommodations. I experienced that on campus myself, but whenever I use the accommodations that are offered for me, that's when I'm very successful and I do well. And I would just recommend that they would just keep on asking for support, accommodations, and to look for programs that are out there that can help them. And also not to be afraid to share their story. I can remember writing has always been a really big thing for me with healing. And I can remember I had a friend that told me, you should really write about having a learning disability. And I thought that was too personal. And I waited so many years. But when I finally did it, that was just one of the most healing things that I've ever done. And I had the chance to reach out to other people.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And you just mentioned that, did you say that you were diagnosed in kindergarten?
Yes.
So what really helped you as a very young child to sort of get through that time? Was it parents? Was it somebody else who advocated for you? What was really helpful for you at that age?
Well, definitely my parents. They supported me all throughout my years of school and explained to me that I had a learning disability and I learned differently.
Yeah.
I also had just writing was helpful too. That was one of the first things we found out I was really good at. My dad found a story that I wrote about a dinosaur and he said, oh, this is really good. And that just encouraged me to want to write more. And then it was also finding friends when I was a teenager that were outside of my school district because I was different from my peers and was bullied from a young age, and it got worse as a teenager. But it was finally having other acceptance and shedding that reputation of being the outcast when I got older, just with different people, and that helped, and people that shared the same interest.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be really helpful. And last question, just to finish up.
Okay.
What would you sort of say, just a general message about supporting people who have invisible disabilities, especially our young people who are, so vulnerable and already dealing with so much at that age. And this is like an additional thing for them. So what would you say to those supporting them?
Just tell them to definitely listen to people, because a lot of times when you have an invisible disability, people sometimes just don't always take it seriously. And I think it's listening to them and their struggle and finding ways to support them.
Perfect. Well, Michelle, can you tell us a little bit more about how we can, connect with you online or find your work online as well?
Sure. You can find me at my blog, michellesmission.net. I blog about life with a learning disability and have disability related articles. I also have my photography and a small store where you can purchase my artwork. And I have a disability forum as well. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram too.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I just love what you do, because I work with young people, and I always say young people have it tough already. So it's great that you're there supporting them with everything that they're going through. So thank you so much for coming on and telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, Paula.
Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.